What if the delay you're frustrated by is not denial? What if the silence you feel from heaven is actually protection? We love instant results, instant answers, instant breakthroughs. But God often works in seasons, not seconds. Today, we step into the life of a man who waited years, not days, not months, but decades for a promise God himself spoke. This is the story of Abraham and what God teaches us when the promise is delayed. Before we go any further, if stories like this strengthen your faith, encourage your spirit, and remind you that God is still working, subscribe to this channel. This is a place where timeless Bible stories meet real-life struggles and where faith is built one message at a time. Turn on notifications so you never miss a word meant for you. Now, let's step into Abraham's story. God spoke to Abram and said, "Look toward heaven and count the stars, so shall your descendants be." But there was a problem. Abram had no child. His wife Sarah was barren, and time was not on their side. Yet Abram believed, not because the circumstances made sense, but because God had spoken. Faith often begins before evidence shows up. Days turned into months, months turned into years. Each morning, Abraham woke up still childless. Each night, he slept with the same unanswered prayer. Can you imagine that? To hold a promise from God and still wait in silence. Waiting tests more than patience. It tests trust. Because it's easy to believe God when things are moving. It's harder when nothing changes. God didn't give Abraham a timeline. He gave him a vision. He pointed to the stars and said, "So shall your descendants be." In that moment, nothing changed on the outside. Abraham was still childless. Sarah was still barren. The night was still quiet. But something shifted inside him. Faith does not require proof. It requires trust in the one who speaks. And Abraham believed, not because it was reasonable, but because God was faithful. After years of waiting, Sarah said, "Maybe God needs our help." So Abraham slept with Hagar, and Ishmael was born. But Ishmael was not the promise. This is what happens when we rush what God intends to grow. Delays tempt us to take shortcuts, but shortcuts often produce complications. God didn't reject Abraham, but he didn't change the promise either, because what God promises, he fulfills his way. The hardest part of faith is not believing God can do it, it's believing God will still do it when time keeps moving. Year after year, Abraham woke up to the same reality, same tent, same desert, same unanswered prayer. Each wrinkle on his face was a reminder of time passing. Each gray hair whispered the question no one wanted to ask. Did I hear God correctly? Yet Abraham kept walking, kept praying, kept trusting, even when faith felt heavy. Waiting doesn't make you weak. Waiting reveals what you truly believe, because faith that survives silence is faith that's being strengthened. For years, heaven seemed quiet, but silence doesn't mean abandonment, and delay doesn't mean God forgot. God was shaping Abraham, stretching his faith, deepening his dependence, because the promise wasn't just about a son, it was about who Abraham would become. Before God gives the promise, he prepares the person. Waiting too long can make faith feel uncomfortable, and discomfort tempts us to take control. Sarah looked at time, and fear whispered, "God is taking too long." So they tried to help God fulfill his own promise. But when humans rush divine timing, they don't cancel the promise, they complicate the process. Ishmael was born, loved, real, but not the promise. Because what God plans, he completes without shortcuts. When Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah 90, God spoke again. Not earlier, not when it made sense, but when it was humanly impossible. And that's when Isaac was born. Why? So no one could take the credit. So faith, not ability, would get the glory. God delayed the promise until only God could fulfill it. There are seasons when God doesn't explain himself. No signs, no confirmations, no clear answers, only quiet. Abraham prayed and heaven seemed still, but silence doesn't mean God has stepped away. It often means God is working in ways you cannot yet see. In the quiet, God strips away distractions. In the silence, he deepens trust, because faith that depends on constant reassurance is fragile, but faith that endures silence becomes unshakable. The delay wasn't punishment. It was protection. Protection from pride, protection from shallow faith, protection from trusting in strength instead of God. Timing builds faith because faith matures in waiting. If God gave everything instantly, we'd never learn to trust him deeply. By the time Isaac arrived, Abraham's strength was gone, Sarah's youth was gone, hope, humanly, was gone. And that's exactly when God moved. Not earlier, not at the logical moment, but at the impossible one. So no one could say Abraham did this or Sarah figured it out. Only God could be praised. When Isaac cried the first time, it wasn't just a baby being born, it was a testimony, a reminder that God's promises are not limited by age, time, or human ability. Delay didn't weaken the promise, it proved it. If you're waiting today, if the promise feels late, if you're wondering why God is silent, remember Abraham. The delay didn't cancel the promise, it confirmed it. Because what God has spoken will come to pass at the right time. Not your time, but his. And his timing never fails. If this message spoke to your spirit, share it with someone who's still waiting. And remember, God is never late. And don't forget to subscribe to keep getting blessed and inspired by our lessons.